The HOA claimed my backyard was now community property. Rick Hendricks, the power-hungry chairman, thought he could bully me into handing it over, just like he had done to others. He was smug, untouchable, convinced I'd back down, but he didn't know I had proof of his fraud. And when the judge saw it, Rick's entire empire came crashing down. Let's start from the beginning. It started with a letter, not a friendly neighborhood update, not a reminder about trash collection. A threat. I found it taped to my front door, the HOA's official seal stamped at the top as if it carried the weight of the law itself. I tore it open and skimmed the contents. The more I read, the harder my grip tightened around the paper. Dear homeowner, we have conducted a review of the neighborhood's zoning regulations and discovered that a portion of your property falls under the HOA's jurisdiction. Due to recent community restructuring, your land is now designated as common space. Please remove any personal structures, including fencing and sheds, within 30 days to comply with community standards. Failure to do so will result in escalating fines and legal action. Sincerely, Richard Rick Hendricks, HOA Chairperson. I felt my stomach drop. My backyard? Common space? That wasn't just incorrect. That was theft. I had lived here for 5 years. I had property deeds, survey maps, and legal documents proving exactly where my land ended. The HOA had never once interfered, until now. This wasn't some clerical error. This was Rick Hendricks trying to take what wasn't his. Meet Rick Hendricks, the HOA dictator. Rick wasn't just the HOA chairperson. He was the HOA. The guy had ruled over our neighborhood for nearly a decade, treating it like his own personal kingdom. He loved fines. He fined people for leaving their garbage bins out too long. He fined them for planting the wrong flowers. He even fined a retired couple for painting their front door a shade too dark. Everyone hated him. But the problem? No one fought back. Most people just paid the fines, too exhausted to argue. Or worse, they moved. Rick made life so miserable for anyone who resisted that eventually they just left. And now he had set his sights on me. Bad move. The confrontation. I didn't wait. I marched straight to the HOA office, letter in hand, ready for a fight. Rick's office was exactly what I expected. Cold, sterile, a single framed photo of him shaking hands with some local politician, probably someone he had bullied into supporting his nonsense. He barely looked up when I walked in. "Ah, Mr. Callahan, I was expecting you." His voice was silky smooth, the kind of voice that belonged to a used car salesman. I slammed the letter onto his desk. "What the hell is this, Rick?" He sighed dramatically, as if he were dealing with an unruly child. "It's quite simple, really. The HOA has been reviewing zoning laws, and we discovered that your property was incorrectly recorded in the past. Legally, part of it belongs to the association." That's a load of crap, and you know it. I reached into my bag and pulled out my property deed, slapping it on top of the letter. This says otherwise." Rick didn't even glance at it. He just smirked. "Well, you're free to consult an attorney if you wish, but I assure you, this is legally binding. If you don't comply, the HOA will have to take further action." I leaned in. "And what exactly does that mean?" His smile widened. "Fines, liens, possible legal action. You can fight it, of course, but, well, these things get expensive. Most people decide it's not worth the trouble." Ah, there it was. This wasn't about property lines. This was about scaring me into compliance. Rick had done this before. Doctored records, pressured homeowners, buried them in legal fees until they gave up. But he had picked the wrong guy. I wasn't about to roll over. I grabbed my deed, turned on my heel, and walked out without another word. Rick thought this was over. He had no idea what was coming. I immediately contacted a lawyer. That's when I learned something even more infuriating. This wasn't just happening to me. A neighbor, Brittany Thomas, had received a similar letter 2 months ago. She fought back, but somehow her case disappeared. The HOA claimed she had agreed to the zoning changes. She hadn't. That's when I knew. This was a scam. I started digging. I reviewed the original neighborhood zoning maps and compared them to the new ones the HOA had submitted. And guess what? Rick had doctored the records. They had literally redrawn the property lines to include my backyard under the HOA's control. I confronted him again. "You really thought you could pull this off?" I threw the maps onto his desk. Rick barely blinked. "Mr. Callahan, I really suggest you stop this fight. It will only cost you money and time." Then he leaned forward with that smug little smirk. "And you might not like what happens next." The next day, I got a $500 fine for non-compliance, then another, then a notice that the HOA had filed a lien on my property. Rick wasn't just trying to take my land, he was trying to financially ruin me. But he had made a huge mistake. He underestimated me. I gathered every piece of evidence: the original property deeds, the security footage of Rick's inspectors trespassing onto my land, the proof that zoning changes had been falsified. Then I did something Rick never expected. I went public. I took my story to a local journalist who started digging deeper. And what they uncovered was bigger than I ever imagined. Rick had pulled this stunt before. For the past 3 years, the HOA had seized property from multiple homeowners, selling portions of land to developers under the table. It was a full-blown fraud scheme. And when the news broke, shit hit the fan. HOA members started turning against Rick. One board member, Susan Caldwell, came forward as a whistleblower. She provided internal emails proving that Rick knew the zoning changes were illegal. It was enough to take him to court. And the best part? Rick had no idea what was coming. Rick walked into that courtroom looking untouchable. His expensive lawyer, his cocky smirk. He really thought he was going to win. And then the judge started reading the evidence, the forged zoning documents, the illegal liens, the whistleblower emails. Rick's smirk vanished. His lawyer tried everything: stalling tactics, counterclaims, even accusing me of harassment. The judge wasn't having it. "Mr. Hendricks, this is not just a zoning issue. This is a clear case of fraud and property theft." Then the judge turned to me. "Mr. Callahan, your property remains fully yours. The HOA's claim is completely invalid. Any fines or liens issued are now null and void." I grinned. But the best part? Rick didn't just lose the case. He was personally investigated for fraudulent financial dealings. 2 weeks later, he resigned in disgrace. And the HOA? They were forced to pay restitution to every homeowner they had scammed. Justice was served. And as I walked out of that courtroom, I couldn't help but smile. Because Rick had tried to steal my land. And now, he had nothing. Final thoughts. You ever face someone who thinks they're untouchable? Someone who abuses power, thinking rules don't apply to them? Rick thought he could rewrite property lines, fine me into submission, and scare me into giving up my own land. But in the end, the law was stronger than his lies. And if you ever find yourself in a fight like this, don't back down.